Hello and welcome back. Still in lockdown here in the UK, so no opportunity for me to travel to London and do some mudlarking. But I'm delighted to say that my friend Candace, please follow her on Instagram. She's at american.mudlark. Put the link there. Candace has sent me 2 boxes of pottery, which she found on the Thames, various parts of London before the lockdown. So that's given me something that I can look at and research, and it's been a wonderful thing. So let's have a look at what she sent. Here's what we're going to look at today. So it's all post-medieval, but there's a good variety of different things, and there's a couple of items here which I haven't found myself. I'm very happy to add to my reference collection of pottery. Having said that all the pottery she sent me was post-medieval, there is one piece here which might just be late medieval or early post-medieval. It's the nice strap handle from a jug, but it's just the method of attaching the handle there, where it's just literally just been poked through the rim of the vessel and sealed with just a finger pressure, is more of a medieval thing. And also the unglazed reduced surface on this red clay might just be 15th century or early 16th century. Well, let's start by having a look at some red wares. Post-medieval red wares, probably made around London, very common finds, 16th, 17th, 18th, even 19th century. So I think that's probably the base of a candlestick rather than a pipkin spout, because it's quite flat there. Post-medieval red wares are humble kitchen items. So here we have a drainer or colander that would have sat on its 3 little feet and pierced in the wall and the base for draining. And these are always nice to find. This is a thumbed rosette. So they've made a sort of flower impression using their thumbs and their fingers. I'll put up a photograph of a complete one that was found, which dates to the 18th century. These could be any time from the 16th to the 18th century. But they're very decorative. Post-medieval redware, very rarely decorated, but this is definitely one step above the majority of pieces. Now this piece doesn't look like much, but it's actually one of the more exciting finds that Candace has made, and it's one of those things where you wish that more had been preserved. It's quite worn. Most of you can probably see it's a tin-glazed earthenware floor tile, but it's got quite a distinctive round collection of rings on the outside, with just some trace of a yellow glaze inside there. But significantly, one of the rings is manganese, so it's a sort of purplish colour, and that has allowed me to identify it as some of the very earliest tin-glazed ware that was made in this country. So most experts would say that the manganese circle marks this as a product of the Aldgate pottery in London, which was run by a Dutch potter who came from the Netherlands to start tin-glazed production in this country, called Jacob Jansen. And he made an application to the Queen Elizabeth I in 1571 to set up a tin-glazed pottery, which he did at Aldgate. And these tiles, floor tiles, very much in the Dutch style, have a frame of round circles and inside a yellow ground normally with an animal on it. Could be a domestic animal, North European animal, but also they had some fantastic beasts like elephants and crocodiles and exotic ones. I'll put up some photographs, but it would have been a lovely tile when it was complete. But anyway, This dates from the late 16th century or early 17th century. There's a small chance it could have been made at Pickle Herring pothouse as well, just at the beginning of the 17th century, from about 1618 to 1630. But most people think they were made by Jacob Jansen at Aldgate. So one to add to my collection, and I'm very, very happy to have it. Enjoy the photographs. How about this lovely stoneware base? So on the bottom you've got the cheese wire marks where it was cut from the wheel. You've got dribbles of glaze inside and out, which show that it was fired in the kiln in an upright position. This is German stoneware, and it is the base of a bartman. So above this would be the globular body, the thin neck, with the bearded face on the front of the neck. So it's nice to find such a large piece. So this would date any time from the 16th to the early 18th century. It always amazes me what you can glean from a broken piece of pottery. This is green glazed, buff, white firing clay, probably borderware, which would date it to 1550 to 1700. But what interested me about it was the mark on the base. And that shows that in the kiln, another pot was rested on top of it. So that's the rim of another pot, probably of the same type. And then you'd make a stack of pots, base to rim, base to rim, base to rim, as far as you dared. So that's probably the rim form of this piece, which is a wide flat rim, which probably marks it out, I would say, as a stool pan or a chamber pot. So an interesting piece of evidence that can be gleaned from that. Okay, mudlarks, another poser for you. What do you think these items are, and when do you think they date to? Very chipped white glaze there with some red, with some blue ringed decorations on them. Yes, they are Delft tin-glazed earthenware, and they're ointment pots or jars. This one's quite big, so it could even be an albarello. So they're used by chemists and in the house to take ointments and to store things. And they had just simple cobalt banded decoration on the white tin glaze, which is very fragile, and so it chips very easily at the edges, and the fabric is a buff colour rather than a refined white earthenware. So this would date from around 1650 to 1750, that sort of time frame. But I do like a bit of tin glaze. So, pottery detectives, what do you think of this? It's stoneware with some cobalt glaze. Any guesses of where and when this was made? Well, hopefully you would have said it's Westerwald, and it's German stoneware, and it's late 17th or early 18th century. It's probably a mug with the reading there and the size of it, and it compares quite well to a mug which I've got here, which is one of my favourite pieces of pottery, which is a complete Westerwald mug. I didn't find this on the Thames, sadly. I had to pay for it, but I bought it at a car boot sale, and I bought it for £1, no less. So you can see that it does match up pretty accurately with the shard that was found in the Thames. So these are very common, and they have a nice roundel there, moulded GR Georgius Rex. George, probably George III. This one particularly is going to be perhaps a bit later, in the 18th century, sort of 1750, possibly even as late as 1800, maybe. But anyway, nice find, and it's always nice to have the complete item to compare the piece to. Another thing about these Westerwald mugs is it's got a hole there where you can attach a pewter lid to it as well, if that is your fancy. 3 more 18th century finds to have a look at. One of them is stoneware. Now this is actually my favourite piece that I was sent, and I've been wanting to find one of these for such a long time. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. I'm going to save this one for the very end, but maybe some of you would like to guess. It's stoneware, salt glazed, and it's got this moulded sprig on it. So what is it and when was it made? Another piece of tin-glazed. This is 18th century, and because of its thickness it's probably a wall tile rather than a floor tile. If we compare it with the Aldgate one, you can see the difference. So the top one is the Aldgate one, and that's definitely a floor tile, but this thin one is a wall tile, or possibly the surround of a fireplace or fireplace tile. That would make it 18th century. I think the design is a stylised vine. So you've got that little yellow dot circle with a dot in the middle, which is the way they would have drawn grapes, and then you've got the little grape tendril bits and the leaves there, and this thing is probably the wing of a bird that's picking at the grapes. I've got some examples, nothing quite exactly the same, but you get the idea when you see these pictures. How about this lovely piece? Again, this is another style of pottery that I've been longing to find. They weren't made for very long, so they don't often get in the archaeological record. But this is Wheildon-type ware. So people originally thought they were all made by Wheildon in Staffordshire, but now of course we know that many people were making them, Great Batch and others. It's on creamware, and it's got this wonderful underglazed sponging in manganese, brown, yellow and green, which produces an amazing effect, a bit like sort of more modern studio pottery, you'd think. And this was popular from around the middle of the 18th century up to about 1780s, so 1750s, 1780s. The small size of the foot rim would mark it out as a tea bowl, a tea saucer with a tea bowl on top. I've got some photographs of different Wheildon ware patterns, plates and a tea bowl and saucer. But again, that's a lovely piece of find, a very distinctive style of pottery from the 18th century. Let's have a look at these pieces now. These are all 19th century, although this one might just fall into the end of the 18th century. So this is quite a coarse red earthenware, unglazed, with this rouletted circle pattern. So what do you think this has come from? In quite a wide diameter of item. It is part of a chimney pot. So Georgian or early Victorian chimney pot, which would have graced London's skyline. And they often had just this band of rouletting, possibly also a maker's mark around the edge. And it's interesting, the only photograph I've got of Georgian chimney pots in situ in London show an identical chimney pot to this. So have a look at that. That's some nice refined earthenware. This is transfer printed. So the rim is transfer printed, the handle is transfer printed. It's got a lid seating, so it would have been a small tureen for sauce or gravy, and have another handle at the other end of it. 2 handles in all. This little foot with some gilt decoration added, probably also from a tureen, and they pierced a hole to let the air out during firing there as well. And there's a lovely transfer printed scene on the bottom of this bowl of a boy sailing his model ship in a stream, and helpfully on the back we have a maker's mark. So the pattern is identified for us as recreation. It's a rare pattern, I can't really find much information about it. J, M and S is the maker, which is John Mere and Sons. They set up in 1837 in Tunstall in Staffordshire. Now you can see there's a little blue pool around the edge of the base there. So this is what people know as pearl ware, which was made up to around 1840. So that fits in quite well with the maker. So this would be a late Georgian or maybe very early Victorian transfer printed bowl. Some earthenwares, part of a moulded pot with nice design, bark, leaves, berries on it. Mid to late Victorian. Quite a similar style to this other piece, which has got flowers and bark and leaves, but this is quite a different animal, as you can see by the bright colours and the inside. So what sort of pottery do you think this might be? It's Majolica. So this was made from the mid-Victorian period right through the second half of the 19th century. We often think of Victorians as being rather sort of black and white because, you know, the photographs we have are black and white, obviously, but they loved colour and vibrant, exuberant colours, quite mad at times. So this has a contrasting pink glaze inside and very bright, colourful glazes outside in multicolours. So it's Majolica. I'll show you some examples. Some of them were crazy Victorian, but I love them. They're amazing and they're very highly collectible if they are in slightly better condition than this little piece here. Well, from a posh bit of Majolica to a humble bit of mocha. So this very distinctive style of pottery is called mocha, and basically the potters would put a drop of liquid with various ingredients, some quite unsavoury, and it would spread out into these trees or seaweed patterns on the slipped surface of the pot. Very, very common in this ringed ware, annular ware, and this probably would have been part of a jug, no doubt used in a humble working class home or probably even in a pub. Pub mugs, pub jugs, made right through the second half of the 19th century and even into the 20th century as well, up to the Second World War. Very humble, very disposable, frequently broken, often found on the Thames, quite distinctive with this pattern on it, but if complete, very, very valuable and very collectible, which is a bit ironic really, as it was just such a humble item in its day, but I rather like these. So we are left with some stoneware, and I haven't forgotten my little mystery piece, which all will be revealed in a minute. So this is all 19th century stoneware, most of it probably Victorian, but there's still some interesting things to be found out from it. This is salt glazed stoneware. It's probably part of a jug, and it's got sprigs on it, so they've sprigged a tree. All the sprig means is that you have a little metal mould which you press clay into, and then you put it on the surface of your pot, and it comes as a moulded pattern which you can add to your pot. And these sort of stoneware sprigged jugs were very common, often with hunting scenes on them. But this is a bit different. It's a little girl, and you can see she's just holding a rabbit and protecting it in her clothing, and she's got a feather in her bonnet, and there's a tree there. So I was very happy to get some help from Phil Mernick, who is an expert on stoneware, especially on hunt jugs, and has a wonderful website about these brown jugs, mernick.org.uk. I'll put a link down here below for that. And he found a complete item with this sprig on it, which was made by James Stiff of Lambeth about 1840. So there's a photograph of that to follow. A lot of stoneware was just very humble domestic or industrial or storage vessels, like this rather large base here. Generally not much decoration apart from some rouletted bands on them. This one, a little bit more interesting, has what looks like a line of hieroglyphics on it. Salt glazed stoneware as well, so it's unlikely to be ancient Egyptian. But these, especially if they're found by the seaside and they're very, very worn, often fool people into thinking that they're very, very old, but they're not. They're made in Derbyshire around the middle of the 19th century, early to late 19th century. And they had these patterns which they put on a roulette wheel. Endless variety of patterns. I'll show you some complete articles so you can see what I mean. Another common find, a simple penny ink. Some people call them pork pie because of the shape. And apparently they were sold for a penny with ink in them. But this one is interesting because it's actually broken. They're very thick walled. And you can see from the inside how it was hand thrown. So they must have made millions of these penny inks, each one hand thrown by a potter in the stoneware factories of the Victorian period. So I say hats off to them to do that all day, and then to have a little form, a wooden or metal form to mould just to form the top of the bottle there. More decorative stoneware. This is glazed inside. I think this is probably early to mid 19th century, and it's got a nice sprig there, decoration of oak leaves and acorns. Probably part of a jug, I would think. Two items now in Bristol glaze. So there's two-tone glaze, a light creamy glaze and a more light brown colour that the items were dipped into. This was developed about 1835 and was very, very common for large, humble storage vessels for about 100 years after that. This probably dates to 1890 or before, just because of the type of lettering. It's sans serif, so it's got those little hooks on each of the ends of the letters there. After this time, from 1890 onwards, they're increasingly both capital letters and also just plain unserifed letters. I'll show you an example of both. And this is indeed, you probably guessed, Cross and Blackwell, the pickle people. They started early on in London and were at this address, 21 Soho Square, from 1839. And they described themselves as oil men, which meant they dealt in oil and also foods preserved in oil, like pickles and sauces. And this later became the thrust of their business. And so the Branston's pickle, which we know and love, was made by this very same company. And there's a picture of a storage jar and also some Branston pickle in case you've forgotten what it looks like. So how about that for a strap handle? That's a solid bit of stoneware. This is a flagon, so a large jug with a small neck, and it's just the handle's been just attached there with a couple of thumbprints. But these were large things. You can make them up to 6-gallon capacity, and they normally had a little number on them, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 6, telling you the capacity of your flagon. So again, Bristol glaze after 1835, more likely to be towards the end of the century or even early 20th century for that piece there. So to finish up, we come to the reveal of my absolute favourite piece from this whole assembly. And thank you very much again, Candice, American.mudlark on Instagram, for sending me this pottery to research and to show. So this is stoneware, salt glazed stoneware with this sprig here. I love this piece because it's part of an 18th century tavern tankard or mug. So this is actually the sign of the tankard. So it's a tree. So it'd either be the oak maybe, or probably the royal oak. And then underneath or to the side it would have a scratched date, possibly impressed in type if it was after the 1750s, with the name of the landlord and probably the name of the tavern as well. So sadly we can't say exactly where it was, but it was obviously somewhere in London. The fabric has got some black dots in it, so it's probably made at Fulham in the 18th century. So Fulham stoneware, 18th century tankard. And the shape of the sprig is actually taken from the inn signs, tavern signs of the day. So I've got this wonderful Hogarth print here, which shows the Angel Tavern with exactly the same shape of sign on it. And the Hogarth print really shows what a sort of busy, noisy, smelly place these taverns would be. Cross between a pub, a restaurant, coach station, shop, gentleman's club, all sorts of things going on, and wonderfully evocative of Georgian London. So very happy to find those. There's some examples from some other tavern signs here, and have a look at that Hogarth print. So I hope you've enjoyed this little roundup of pottery that I was sent, and hopefully we'll be out of lockdown and be able to get back to the Thames soon. If you like pottery, British found pottery, then I've got a book which is available on eBay or Etsy, which is not expensive and which will take you through each era and hopefully identify some of the more commonly found types. Thank you, bye.